Good morning! This is Bill from Curious Cars and Auto House of Naples on a muggy, crappy, and miserable Florida Monday. I absolutely have to say, the last 5 days we've had this incoming and outgoing tropical depression of sorts, and it's created all this moisture and humidity, and all you have to do is walk outside. That's it. You don't have to do anything. Just walk outside and you're dripping. Your clothes are damp, everything's moist, it's just not a very nice way to live at all. And again, I know the endless weather reports when the car's sitting here, but I just have to share because it's cathartic to get it out. You know, if I can just rid it from my soul, then I don't have to, well, I do have to think about it. There has been a cacophony of birds this morning. When I showed up, they were so loud, it was unbelievable. I didn't think I'd even be able to start the video. They do seem to have quieted down a little bit, but I know they're out there, and they've just heard me, and now they're staging somewhere, probably in that tree, and waiting for me to stop paying attention so they can come down and cause tremendous bodily harm. So we're going to keep an eye out for that. Otherwise, I am extremely pleased and happy to have today this 1934 Ford Cabriolet Deluxe. Now, look, I'm no expert in these old Fords, none at all. Now, pre-war era is... I'm a tourist, an absolute tourist. So if you're one of these people that specializes in, you don't have to nitpick the video to make me feel bad. I already do. You're not going to be gaining anything. So, you know, if you have any interest in watching it, just take it for what it is. And, you know, let me have a little bit of fun with it, and then we can all move on together. But again, I'll tell you why. Because it's a complex era, much more complex than it would seem at face level. I mean, you know, there's like 7 different, maybe even more, maybe like 10 different models of 34 Ford. There's a Roadster that looks a lot like this Cabriolet. There's a wagon, there's a sedan, there's a two-door, not two-door, Tudor, T-U-D-O-R, and a four-door, F-O-R-D-O-R, and a variety, a Phaeton, if you will. I mean, there's all kinds of different 34 Fords, so it even took me a little while to figure out that I had a Cabriolet here instead of a Roadster, so go easy on me. Go easy on me. So, you know, I had to decide whether or not to touch base on 2 different things when doing this video. The first one would have been hot rodding in general, which is, of course, the thing that oh, God, what a beautiful view of that car. You know, it takes me back to being a kid. You know, I always talk about the cars of my youth. Not the cars that I own, but the cars that I saw or read about that had tremendous influence on me. And one of them, a big one, was the ZZ Top Eliminator car of the 1980s. And who could forget that thing? You know, a lot of bands, they had trouble making the adjustment from the radio to video. ZZ Top had no such trouble. None at all. All they did was bring out Billy Gibbons' incredible 33 Ford 3-window coupe, some really hot-looking chicks in attractive, slutty gear, and some, you know, cool-sounding, bluesy Texas guitar sounds, and it was a smash hit. There are 3 songs that appeared in, I believe: Gimme All Your Lovin', Sharp Dressed Man, and of course Legs. And let me tell you, that car, not to mention those broads, had a tremendous effect on me as a kid, and that stayed with me. In fact, it helped entrench the movement that I had from, you know, as a kid I was really focused on European cars, so it was, American cars were just there, and then that car came along, that 33 Ford, and I was absolutely blown away, and that led me down a little bit of a hot rod path as well. Got me into some V8 American stuff, and, you know, I've never really sort of looked back. I've always had an interest in both. But anyway, that was an amazing car to me. And of course, it shares quite a bit with this car. So driving this thing was a tremendous opportunity and privilege for me. And in some ways, it lets me relive the joys of my youth. But anyway, I digress. So I could get into hot rodding, or I could get into, you know, the way this car was designed, the whole Edsel Ford, Gene Gregory thing. And so I figured I'd just do a little bit of both. And I tried to do it as briefly as I can possibly do. And we'll start with hot rodding, which is more of a philosophy. Honestly, a philosophy than it is any kind of a car thing. I know that's going to cause me some flack, but there it is. I mean, cavemen could have been hot rodders of a sort, you know, if they took 2 different primitive tools, decided the handle was one on better and the head was one, better on another. They put them together and made something better than either of the original two. Or if you remember that movie, The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly, when the actor who played the Ugly, that guy, he went into some hardware shop and he made one revolver out of the parts of like 3 or 4 different ones because he, liked the way they fit together or sounded. That is the essence of hot rodding. It was taking stuff that was already there, these pre-made parts or pre-made cars, and putting them together in such a way that the cars became better and faster. To some extent, you could call the guys who made the original cars, your even your Model T, your Fords, your Benzes, those guys, hot rodders, except they were working with nothing. They had to make their own raw materials. So truly, the essence of hot rodding has to include having stuff, big parts bin to pull from to make what you want to make. And that's a pre-World War I. Hot rodding existed. It was called the Speedster Era, and the fast Fords, and they were Model Ts that guys took and they stripped down completely, almost to the bare frame with just a motor. They didn't want it to look like shit, so some of them put bucket seats in them and big round fuel tank and a little toolbox at the back, so they looked a little bit like the Stutz Bearcat or something, those old race cars. But anyway, they made these speedster things. They made them quicker using what methods and parts they had available to them, and they raced them. And that went on for a while. It was kind of a big deal. And, time progressed. It got more I don't know what you'd call it, more dynamic, more involved. All of a sudden people started making engine mods for them, overhead valve stuff. The Model T and Model A motors are called bangers, and they weren't working with a lot of horsepower there, so they had to do what they could do to make them quicker, and they did. But anyway, roll around into the late 20s, out comes the Model A, and that ushers in a new era of hot rodding called the Gow Job. And I've heard that term before, but man, did I have to research it to make sure I got the pronunciation right. I finally found an old video with the Iski Cam guy talking about his youth, and that confirmed it for me. So it's Gow rhymes with cow. But anyway, Gow Jobs were not dissimilar to hot rodding. Gow Jobs were not dissimilar to Speedsters, except they did draw on the Model A, and instead of sort of stripping the whole car, they did leave a residue of the bodies on them. I mean, if you see a Model A without a cowl, without a rear, just a bucket in the middle with a bunch of trailing arms everywhere for the suspension, that could be a Gow Job. And of course the fenders came off as well, which to me is kind of a shame, but I get it. It also brought in more of a more part. They did engine swaps. They did brake swaps. They went from manual brakes to hydraulic brakes, and again, all these things to sort of make it quicker. Go forward a few years, and the release of the Model 18 in 1932, and that is a very, very famous car, probably the most famous car in all of hot rodding. Maybe you've heard the term Little Deuce Coupe. What was so important about that car, other than the styling, which honestly was quite gorgeous, quite similar to this car, was that it had a V8. Lincoln had abandoned the V8. Ford had bought Lincoln essentially for Edsel Ford a few years before, and they decided to move to V12. So one of the 8s they had developed, they put in the Ford lineup in 1932, the Flathead V8, which would become the most famous motor in all of hot rodding, really. And it was like a $50 option over the standard 4-cylinder. So, and that amounts to nothing. I mean, you're talking like 200, whatever it was a very small, inexpensive upgrade, and everybody opted for it. Absolutely nobody wanted the 4-cylinder when they could get this V8, and certainly that's very understandable. So that became a huge deal. And in fact, it's made the 4-cylinder cars kind of desirable and valuable because there just really aren't any of them. But anyway, that went on for a while. That brought in the hot iron era, which ran basically up to the end of the 30s and the beginning of World War II. And it ran with That's really where hot rodding found its legs. There are a few different things. Okay, so they're racing on dry lake beds out in California with these hot iron cars. They're racing around old horse tracks in the Midwest and the East, and it's becoming a real thing. Indy, the Indy 500 went back to its roots and started in, like, I think in 1930, basing cars on production cars again. And man, did that also, cause a stir within the hot rodding world, because people would go out in Hudsons and Fords and Chevys, and they were hopped up, and those modifications from Indy made their way into the street mods and the dry lake bed mods and horse track mods. Everything got faster and quicker and was building to a crescendo when all of a sudden, of course, World War II comes out, and all the guys who were into hot rodding are of the age where they, put them all up in mothballs and joined the war effort. Well, that actually worked out to the hot rodders' benefit. God, I know I'm rambling on here, but, I am just scraping the surface of what could be said on all of this stuff. Barely scraping the surface, but anyway, all these young men went off to war, and they learned about machining, they learned about body panels, they were, maintaining and fixing airplanes, dealing with high-performance engines. They were getting quite an education on how to work with machinery. And they came out of the war, the GI Bill was there, so they had a little bit of money in terms of, being able to get a house. Or one of the things you could do, there was a year you could get with unemployment of sorts, and some of these guys took advantage of that. By experimenting with upgrades for cars that while they were getting paid. So they had the time and luxury to experiment. By the time the unemployment ran out, they had a product that they could sell. And some of those became stuff that you'd have heard of today. Edelbrock was way earlier, but, Iski Cam, that was earlier. Whatever. Anyway, some of these guys who made modification parts were subsidized by the war effort, which, thank God, that's the kind of government help I can deal with. But anyway, it became a very, very big deal, and hot rodding became huge. There was a shortage of new cars. There was a plethora of old Model Ts, Model As, and of course the 32 through 35 cars, or 34 cars. And guys bought them, and they started making hot rods out of them, and they started racing them. And that grew into a variety of different things. It grew into the salt flat thing, the top speed contests. It became street racing, which was fine before the war when everywhere was kind of mildly populated, but in the population boom after, it became kind of a sort of a big negative PR thing. So in comes the National Hot Rod Association in its infancy, and they go around from state to state, moving cars from street racing into much more officiated organized racing on many of the abandoned Air Force runways that had been, used for the war and now just sat idle. That also sort of mimicked the SCCA guys who more or less did the same thing. Their road racing cars, moved to the old airports and such. And it became an organized deal, and it was huge. And then it became a huge part of pop culture. It started turning up in the movies. It started turning up in songs. The Beach Boys, one of the most famous hot rods of all time, is that little Deuce Coupe from the album cover. I don't know if it's Endless Summer, doesn't matter. One of their album covers is actually a famous hot rod that's built and owned by a guy and still exists today. And it became a huge part of the 50s and 60s. And then that grew into the muscle car era. Very slowly, but it did, because the manufacturers noticed that these guys all wanted to go fast. So they started building new cars with high-performance engines to compete with these old things running around. Everybody made it to the racetrack or the drag strip to, move them. And that led to pressure to make them harder, faster, and so on and so forth. So the muscle car era was born. You could buy a go-fast car right off the factory showroom. And hot rodding started to I won't say it declined when the time you get into the 70s, but it changed because why spend a huge amount of money making this 34 Ford a hot rod when you could spend less and go buy a new 69 Z28 that was faster? So during the malaise era and after the muscle car era, hot rodding moved more into the show car world, where cars were built for style and cruising, and it became sort of a way to show off your technical prowess of the build. And then the point of it was to drive around, show off, exhibit the cars, have some fun with them. Move into the 1980s, you get a guy who comes out named Boyd Coddington. He brought about a whole revitalization of the hot rod thing. Everything was carved and polished and machined billet aluminum. He made some amazing cars over the years. I think we actually have a Coddington car down at work. I may try to do that one, but I'm not pushing my luck. But anyway, Coddington brought in the super high dollar, super show car hot rod. And then, that goes on for a while, all of that stuff. And then, like everything else in American culture, there's a reaction against it, and you get into rat rods. And that was, sort of a big, giant wet shit on the super highly polished, highly sophisticated muscle car hot rod that had been going through the 80s and 90s, and it was just stuff that people kind of, the more screwed up and weird and unusual and cheap it was, the better. Primer paint, weird shit hanging off it, mismatched wheels, torn seats. Rat rods became, and still to some extent are a going thing, and they have become very cool. Although I will say that now they've become extremely expensive in their way of mimicking, something that shouldn't be expensive. And even now you're getting into, what do they call, day two cars or something, where you take a 69 Camaro, and instead of doing it up in a modern way with an LS motor and all the modern stuff, you're doing it up the way it would have been in the 1970s, and that's kind of neat too. But anyway, the point being, the car culture has spread and branched out from the very moment that cars made their appearance. And while it is kind of uniquely American, the whole hot rod thing, it's absolutely global as well. I mean, you go to Sweden and they're hot rodding. Denmark, they're hot rodding. In fact, the first... This car, the 32 Ford, first made its appearance as the Model Y, I believe, in England. And we'll get into that in a minute, because that gets into the Edsel Ford thing, which I'm going to get into as soon as I wipe the sweat from my brow here in a second. Then we'll get into this car. But anyway, hot rodding has become a global phenomenon and is followed and beloved by, a wide variety of people, many of whom were introduced to it in unusual ways. Myself, not just through friends and car guys, but also through that damn ZZ Top car. That still remains a dream of mine to own and drive one exactly like it. But anyway, I'm going to pause here for a moment. We're safe from the birds. They haven't hit. I'm going to get briefly into the Edsel Ford thing, and then we'll dive into this car. All right, well, if you want to talk about the original Odd Couple, there were no two people less alike, none, than Henry Ford, the original, and his son Edsel Ford. Henry Ford was this real blue-collar, function-over-form tough guy, and Edsel was his... I won't call him his effeminate son, but I'm sure in some ways he was a tremendous disappointment to Henry, at least in the sense of, being very artistic and cultured and world-traveled, the precise opposite of Henry Ford. And Henry Ford in 1922 bought Lincoln. It was, in fact, quite a revenge thing with Henry Leland, but that's another story. But he ends up with Lincoln, and he hands it off to Edsel, who's 25 years old, to give him something to do, basically. He just wants to be rid of the kids. He gives him Lincoln. And that's where Edsel starts coming into his own. Right around the same time, General Motors started the Department of Art and Color, led by a very famous guy named Harley Earl, who loved chrome. Edsel was quite the opposite. He was a little bit more sophisticated. He liked things without chrome. He liked them streamlined and modern looking and European, if you will. And he hired a guy named Eugene Gregory, who had actually worked very briefly for Earl at GM, but, had designed yachts, he'd done other stuff, and by all accounts was a brilliant young designer. And what he was basically the hands that could shape and mold the designs that Edsel had in his brain, but he wasn't a designer and, couldn't. So Edsel would push these things over to Gregory, who would then create them. And he had a huge impact on the Ford lineup. I mean, Henry Ford thought the Model T was just fine for either a millionaire or a farm labor. It's just what they needed. It didn't matter how it looked. And Edsel, of course, thought that was very different. He knew what GM was going to be up to. So he started working on the designs of Fords. And this car, this 1934, and more correctly, the original 1932 with the V8, was the result of that. It was a beautifully designed car. And I think if you look at this car right now, you can see that. I mean, sometimes you look at an old car like this, and it's tough to sort of see the design in the way you'd look at a modern design. Every car had big fenders then, and body on frame and whatnot. But the styling of this car was absolutely stunning. That long slanted grille, which was different from the upright one of 32 and the more curved one of 33. The air slats in the side of the engine cowling. The way it swoops into the back and forms this beautiful sort of downward turn that matches the fenders. Even the design of the fenders. The car is quite stunning to look at, and for that you can thank Edsel and Gregory. And in fact, the way that Ford was able to compete down the road with GM instead of being an afterthought, you could really lay right at the doorstep of those two guys. I mean, sure, the reason that the 41 Continental exists, we know that, is because of those two guys. Beautiful car. And probably the reason the 55 T-Bird came out was those two guys, and Ford became a much more well-rounded car company because of their input. By all accounts, Edsel Ford was an absolute genius. And of course, his son was Henry Ford II, the Deuce, who famously went on to race Ferrari at Le Mans. So there's flies. Nice little family affair Ford had going on. The flies are all back. But anyway, they created these cars, and the 32, 33, and 34 are the quintessential hot rods, and the engine that was in them, the Flathead V8, was the quintessential hot rod engine for many, many years. It got replaced probably by the small block Chevy in the 70s or 60s, and now they're all using modern motors and whatnot. But for many, many years, it was the Flathead Ford that was the big deal. And as a result, people bought them in droves. They were plentiful, and they were out there, and that is why, they became such a big part of hot rodding after the war. Not only were they very good looking, not only were they very easy to modify, but there was a bunch of them out there, and a bunch of parts, a bunch of Flathead V8s, and the rest is absolute history. So anyway, that's all I'm going to do with Edsel and Gregory and Henry Ford, and let's just get right into this one. So, again, this is a cabriolet. The reason I know that, and the reason you can tell that, is it's got this fixed and built-in windshield into the cowling. If it was a roadster, which looks very, very similar, it would have a removable and bolted-on windshield. It would also have no side windows. It would use curtains instead, which is the true traditional definition of the roadster. Also in 34, it got this wider, it's a flat grille. Well, it's curved and it's angled in the middle. But anyway, it's different from the 33, which had more downward slats and a big swoop out at the bottom. And, of course, the 32 was upright. The 34 headlights are considered more attractive. They're more bullet-shaped instead of the rounder ones that were on the 33, which is why Billy Gibbons' Eliminator used 34 headlights on his car. This car is all steel. I mean, all of it, which makes it a bit of a rarity and makes it more valuable in the modern world. Even the fenders and running boards are steel. You could essentially build one of these cars today from all of the parts that are available being reproduced, the fenders, the bodies, but most of them are fiberglass. And, you'll see a lot of steel bodies with fiberglass fenders, that sort of thing, but very rarely do you still find one that's all original factory steel from the get-go. Now, this car was put on a tube frame because that is part of what makes it more modern. You can use a more modern suspension, and it makes it much more drivable. If you look in here, you can see all those beautiful chrome A-arms underneath. It also has a trailing link suspension in the back with a Ford 9-inch rear end sitting on coil. Coils and coil frames. It's a very, very modern suspension in this car. Also a very modern braking system, which really runs properly with how these cars are built. Most of the guys who own them want to drive them. This one has 8,000 miles since the build, which doesn't maybe sound like much, but for a car like this, 8,000 miles is a fair amount. It shows you what a terrific driver it is. This thing even has air conditioning. It's got power steering, power brakes, power windows, air conditioning. I mean, it is a tremendous driver. I flirted with the idea of popping off this cover here and bringing the top up, but the hell with it. I'm already dripping, and if I start doing that, it's just going to wreck the whole rest of my day. So you have to look at the pictures on the website if you want to see the top up. But anyway, that does come up, and that's nice. It has these custom wire wheels with the original V8 logo that came out with that Flathead Ford. Because it's a 34, it has two latches on the cowling, which in fact, let's just get into the engine of this thing right now. I don't know if I'm going to be able to do this one-handed. In fact, I'm sure I'm not. So let me just pause for a minute and then we'll pick it up. Okay, so here you can see it, and you can see the beautiful detail that's gone into it. So here is a 302 Ford, very common engine to be used in these cars. It has 351 heads on it. You can see the chrome alternator, the billet pulleys, that sort of thing. Powder-coated headers, the 4-barrel, the, cool-looking air cleaner up there. This is all very traditional hot rod stuff, and this one is done to a very, very high level. You can see the way that they brought the engine cowling back, the hood all the way back over the cowling here in order to give the car sort of a longer look, which, again, you can go back to Gregory and Ford for that. I mentioned the Model Y. The cars in England, even way back then, had to be smaller and feckier than the cars in America because the insurance companies based it all on tonnage and horsepower and displacement. So Gregory had designed a Model Y for the English market, which was, early in 1930 or so, which was more or less a scaled down version of this car. And when Edsel Ford saw it, he said, man, that's beautiful. Let's base our new car on that one. We'll just make it bigger. But anyway, there it is. So there's a, pretty traditional hot rod motor. Some of these guys get rid of the side hoods and just run the top or no hood at all. You see that very often. A high boy, they call it, is when you remove the fenders completely and just have the wheels and tires there and visible suspension. Oh, God, there's such a endless supply of hot rod terminology that it's not, even if I knew it well enough, I wouldn't want to get into it. But anyway, there it is. That's the way the hood looks. And now let's get it back down and move on. All right, this Greyhound hood ornament came from Lincoln. Lincoln discontinued it. They went on to something else, so Edsel moved it over to the Ford lineup. And the original ones are rare as hen's teeth. I guess the tail was freestanding, so it was very easy to break off. It was, I believe, designed by Stant for use on these cars, and they're tough to find. They're out there, but they're tough to find, and they are stunning. It's supposedly anatomically correct, which I haven't looked at. This one is hauling ass, I presume, because it's got some thing up its rump that's holding it down. Anyway, it became very instrumental. What's the word? Influential, this hood ornament. Jaguar borrowed from it to make their Leaper and some other cars. The animal bounding is a pretty impressive looking hood ornament. There you can see the little chrome wipers, suicide style, like the suicide doors, and this pop-up cowl vent. All right, let me get back in here for a minute and we'll get into the trunk. Oh my God, things are very hard one-handed. They really, really are. I like to not let that bang, so I actually had the battery out earlier, so let's put that back down. All right, so here you see an area that is the trunk and also a rumble seat, I believe you can make. It's got cushions that will let you sit back there. Frankly, I think it works great as an infant area because if you buy one of these hot rods and you want to drive it, you might have your little kid wanting to go with you. And you say, oh, God. Anyway, you can stuff him in here. If he's a toddler or an infant, all the better, because once he's in, he's going to feel pretty safe with all the carpet and the padding. There's not going to be too much that can hurt him, so you just very gently lower that down on top, and now he's safe and secure inside. There you can see this one still has the bumpers. Those are often removed on many of these hot rods. It's got those kind of swoopy looking, rocket looking taillights, which are neat. Like the way the license plate comes off there. And one of the big differences between this model and the prior A's and T's is that they moved the fuel tank from up in the cowling area to the back behind and between the suspension, which is a much more modern place to put it. You can also see it has dual exhaust out the back. And again, from every angle, this car is just gorgeous to look at. It really, really is. Love the suicide doors. I think that's a gorgeous feature. I think they were a safety issue when the cars were, I mean, the whole car's a safety issue, let's be honest, but this guy had pins installed, which I guess are an important safety thing on these that'll keep the doors closed in case of collision. Being a deluxe model, you get all sorts of this kind of stuff, these little fancy lights on either side, all the chrome, and here you see the windows. This is something a Roadster would not have. It would use the curtain windows. Also, this car used some sort of wood frame, the cabriolets, that's partial wood frame, which was a little bit tougher to keep up to snuff. You'd have to worry about termites if you were restoring one. I also don't believe these seat belts came factory. I think that was something the guy added. And yeah, I don't know. They're for pussies in this car. Nice little pockets back here. A good spot to put your 9mm or your drugs or whatever it is you want to have. Here's some, I think, photos of... yeah, I mean, here's a quick picture of the car. This is the way the guy found it, in pieces in a garage somewhere. And, of course, spent many, many thousands of dollars turning it into what you see today. So, pretty incredible work and love that goes into a lot of these old cars. God, that angle. Is that gorgeous? You know, this is done more traditionally, more of a style that I probably wouldn't. I think it's an older guy's style, and I can appreciate it, you know, that it still has, the original looking mirrors and door handles and those little cowl lights and whatnot. But a lot of the modern guys would have shaved all that stuff off. There'd probably be no hinges in the back, no door handles. It would all be button release. You know, Boyd Coddington built one of the most famous cars he built was called the Silver Bullet, which I believe was either a 32 or 33 Ford Roadster. And part of what Boyd's philosophy was the details are what you can't see, not what you can. And he had an eye, has an eye, that's amazing and could actually improve on an already beautiful design in a way that you don't know it's been improved on. And that's part of Boyd's magic. But all right, I tell you what, I'm going to get all my crap in the car, get ready to go, and then we're going to go for a spin. All right, let's do it. Again, I gotta say, the attention to detail on this car is just phenomenal. And being all steel, I won't wrap too hard. That is a very, very big deal on these, and really what separates the men from the boys in these cars. Enormous deal. All right, so down on that, you can see that gorgeous suicide door open, and that was a big part. I remember the ZZ Top car when the door would open and that one sexy booted leg would come out. Oh my God, was that hot. Anyway, let's just get in. So it has seats that move forward and recline. Very big deal. You can see this custom steering column is quite beautiful. You can see the fit and finish, the e-brake there. Close that so you get a better view. You know, everything is just, all the linkages, very, very high-po. No doubt about that at all. I actually don't know what this is. Has to be on, probably the car, but we'll see. But we do have power windows, which is amazing. I think that's a pretty cool upgrade. This is the original dash from the car, which of course has been upgraded. It has vintage AC, so even with, it doesn't quite have defrost, but you can make it blow out your feet or blow out the bottom or blow out the center vent. And over here you've got a vent to the left of the steering column and ditto the right. And let me tell you, that is a nice feature. I mean, this is a car you could actually use on the highway. I'm not going to, because I don't really trust the tires. I don't know the car that well, and I don't want to screw up somebody's hot rod by losing a wheel or a tire on the highway. So I guess I'm a bit of a wimp there, but the hell with it. This one has a very, very neat autometer vintage gauge cluster. No tack, interestingly, but everything you need otherwise. Fuel, volts, water, and oil. And of course, 120 mile an hour speedo. Which I'm going to bet is one of those GPS versions, but I could be wrong. Maybe they actually did tie it in. I also understand, and you know, I could be wrong. I know this has an overdrive transmission, and I think it's got a GM tread, a 700 R4, mated with an adapter plate to the 302 in between that and the 9-inch rear, but I'll verify when I get back. Again, everywhere you look, the fit and finish, the quality of the build is exceptional. I love this little minimalist rear view mirror. You know, it's just, this one actually had a glove box, of course they did originally, and even down to the cigarette lighter, and this probably controls the cowl vent and the way that the vintage air was installed. And the banjo steering wheel is absolutely gorgeous, just gorgeous. Do not believe it's tilt, but you can't have everything. All right, let's fire this thing up. You heard that high torque starter, which sounds awesome. You hear the growl at that 302, which, you know, not insane, just perfect. So you put some kind of mufflers on there that do quiet it down, but still give you a very nice growl. And if you want to hear that AC compressor click on, we've got ourselves a little bit of AC going for a minute, just so I can get some of the moisture off my damn face. I mean, this is just ridiculous. There's neutral. Hell with it, let's just go for a drive. There you see 8,200 miles on this thing, so the guy was driving and enjoying it. You're really hard up against this, you know, it's just the nature of the beast. This is a narrow cab. You know, you hear those terms like chopped and channeled. I should have gotten into that earlier. Chopped is where they actually cut the roof down to make it lower, like that 33 ZZ Top car has a chopped roof. It's not nearly as high as it came from the factory. Channeled is when they drop the body down over the frame. Doing so can make the body look a lot lower to the ground without really modifying the suspension at all. But by the nature of a fendered, you know, full fendered car, you're really kind of hard up against this door panel. And if you have a lady friend with you in the passenger seat, you know, you're going to be intimate whether you want to be or not. Love the way that Greyhound looks over the cowl. I think that's cool as hell. And they do call this steering wheel a banjo wheel based on these, you know, stringy looking things with the bridge and whatnot. And of course the Ford V8 logo looking at you. This is going to be noisy, but the hell with it. Alright, so, you know, that's about all I'm going to do. I'm not going to hot rod this thing. Ironic word, choice of words. Just again, because it's not mine, it's done to a very high level, and while I trust it based on the obvious build quality, it's just not mine to brutalize. So I'm going to just make it a cruiser, which is my plan. Get this, God, the brakes are exceptional. Exceptional. Definitely front discs. Not sure about the rear. And we got our mirror working right. Yeah, and there you hear 4 shift. So definitely a 4-speed overdrive tranny of transmission of some sort, but whether it's a Ford or Chevy, I don't immediately know. You know, people are going to see me driving on the street dripping from the head in this thing, wonder if I just stole it. For the love of God, is it humid? See all the little LED lights? The blue up there is for high beams, and the reds are very simply for turn signal indicators. Oh, and here, I'll show you this real quick while we're here. So these do work nice. There's the power windows, which again is just not something that you see very commonly on 34 Ford coupes or convertibles. It's just not what they came with. The amount of love that's in this thing is tremendous. And you do have two switches on the left and one on the right, correctly so. You know, it would have been much easier just to run one switch on each side. Not to this guy. He really took it to the next level. And that's the joy of hot rodding, is the you can do as much or as little as you like. It's all about the build. It's all about your budget, and it's all about where you want to go. And that makes you know, that makes it accessible to just about anyone. And that's really why I kind of like the rat rod thing. Is it brought acceptable hot rods back to the guy who's on a shoestring budget. He could make something pretty cool that people looked at and liked, and he didn't have to spend a whole lot of money on it. He just had to be ingenious, and that is the true essence of hot rodding anyway. So here we are at 60. I mean, you can see the thing is quite a driver, and that's, you know, that's really neat. This is something you could take to car shows. You could take to, you know, some sort of weekend event. You could drive it there and drive it back. And that also is another essence of hot rodding. It's much, much cooler than showing up somewhere with the car on a trailer. When you're driving it yourself, you're a bit of a bad mofo. And stopping at the roadhouses, you know, stopping to get food at roadside stands. It's really what the genre is all about. So look, I'm sure it's excruciating driving this thing with me talking over the wind. I'm gonna cut it off there. Got some more fun stuff coming up soon, and hopefully have a bit of fun with it. I'll do a little bit more of this one on the drive to work, and then we'll keep rolling along. Thank you so much for your patronage. Honestly, man, I read all the comments. You guys really keep me going. You really do. I am absolutely honored and humbled that not only will some people actually watch these damn things, that they'll take the time to comment on them. So thank you so much for that, and I'm going to keep the train rolling along, and we'll have something fun over the next day or two. Take care, and we'll see you with the next one.